They say survival is the oldest story ever told, but survival in the Stone Age was nothing like the fantasy you might carry in your head. You think of strong hunters with spears, great fires lighting the night, and tribes celebrating after a successful hunt. But here's the truth. If you right now were dropped into the Stone Age, you would starve. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because the world back then was designed to break you. Every single step of survival, from finding food to keeping it, from making fire to defending it, was a battle that most of us today are hopelessly unprepared for. You'd think catching a fish or picking berries would be simple, but that's the illusion. The hidden reality is far harsher. There are facts I'll hold back for now, secrets of Stone Age survival you're not ready to hear yet. But we'll get there. This is not just about food, it's about time. It's about knowledge. And it's about a kind of relentless hunger that never goes away. Because starvation wasn't an accident in the Stone Age, it was a constant shadow. Stay with me, because in the next moments, you'll discover why your modern instincts would betray you, why every move you'd make could be your last, and why the Stone Age was not a place for dreamers, but a place that demanded everything. The Stone Age was not an age of abundance, no matter how many paintings or textbook illustrations trick you into believing otherwise. It was an age of scarcity, and hunger was not a stranger that occasionally knocked on the door, but a permanent guest that lived inside your bones. And if you were suddenly dropped into that world with all your modern comforts stripped away, you would be forced to face the hunger trap, an invisible cage built not with stone or iron, but with knowledge you do not have, and instincts that have long been buried. You may think, I'd just look for fruits, I'd just catch a rabbit, I'd just light a fire and cook it. That thought itself betrays you, because in the Stone Age, nothing was just anything. Every task required hours, sometimes days, of effort, with no guarantee of success. Take fruits, for example. You picture a forest brimming with ripe berries waiting for your hand, but the truth is harsher. Wild plants in most regions were seasonal, scarce, and dangerously deceptive. For every edible berry, there were 10 that could kill you slowly, twisting your stomach into knots until you begged for death. And without the generations of trial and error knowledge passed through tribes, you wouldn't know which was safe, which was poison, and which looked harmless but contained toxins that could end you in hours. You may think I exaggerate, but I haven't even revealed the deadliest mistake yet. That comes later. Now, let's talk about hunting. The Hollywood version shows hunters armed with spears, chasing down mammoths or deer, bringing food back for the tribe. You think, I'd just sharpen a stick and go hunting. But here's the trap. Prey animals in the Stone Age were not waiting for you. They were elusive, fast, and far more dangerous than you imagine. Even a rabbit, yes, a small rabbit, could evade you for days, because without traps you don't know how to build, you would waste endless energy chasing food you could never catch. And energy was the real currency of survival. Every step you took, every rock you lifted, every attempt to dig, climb, or strike cost you calories that needed replacing. One mistake, one failed attempt, and you'd lose more energy than you gained. Think about that. How quickly your body would start consuming itself, eating muscle to keep you moving. And here's a secret I'll share. In the Stone Age, hunger wasn't always about having no food. Sometimes it was about having the wrong food, or too little of it, until starvation disguised itself as exhaustion. That's a truth most people don't realize, but I'll explain why in a later chapter. Stay tuned. You might wonder about fishing. Surely water must have been salvation, right? Just grab a stick, stand by the river, spear a fish, and feast. That's the illusion again. Stone Age rivers were tricky, filled with fast currents, dangerous predators, and fish that were far quicker than your eyes. A single misstep in those waters meant drowning, or worse, hypothermia, that would slowly drain your life away. And here's a little teaser. The Stone Age human had an ally for fishing that you do not have, a secret technique that took centuries to refine. But I won't reveal it yet. Instead, consider this. If you failed to fish, failed to hunt, failed to gather, you would find yourself in a deadly spiral known as the hunger trap, where your brain became clouded, your reflexes dulled, and your body betrayed you at the very moment you needed strength the most. And the scariest part, This spiral didn't take weeks. It could start in just 3 days. By the end of the first week, if you hadn't found reliable food, you'd be a ghost walking, eyes hollow, body trembling, and death close behind. But there's another cruel twist, one I've kept from you until now. Even if you managed to kill something, say a deer or a small animal, you wouldn't know what to do with it. Modern people believe meat is just meat. Cut it, cook it, eat it. But a Stone Age kill was complicated. If you didn't know how to butcher correctly, you'd waste precious calories by discarding organs that were packed with nutrition, and sometimes those very organs held the only vitamins that could keep you alive. Did you know that eating only lean muscle meat could actually kill you? It's true, and I'll explain that dangerous paradox later in this film. For now, let's just say your victory in the hunt could still lead to starvation. Think about that. Success and death walking hand in hand, and then there was fire. The one element that seems simple to us, strike a match, light a flame, was perhaps the most difficult survival tool in the Stone Age. Rubbing sticks, striking stones, creating embers, protecting those embers from wind and rain. These were not quick tricks, but skills honed over years. Without fire, raw meat could make you sick, water couldn't be boiled, warmth couldn't be maintained, and predators couldn't be deterred. Without fire, even if you found food, you might still lose the battle. But I'm holding back something here, the darkest truth about fire, a truth that explains why it wasn't just about warmth, but about control over death itself. That I'll reveal in a later chapter. So now, let me draw the picture clearly. You, standing in a forest or on a plain, empty stomach growling, hands trembling, eyes darting. The world around you is silent except for the rustling of leaves, and every sound could be prey or predator. You look for berries, and they're poisonous. You chase a rabbit, and it outruns you. You try to fish, and the river nearly swallows you whole. You attempt to strike fire, and all you make is smoke. With each failure, your body eats away at itself, and hunger becomes more than pain. It becomes madness. This is the hunger trap, the first and most merciless enemy of the Stone Age, and it's the reason why, if you were dropped there today, you would not last long. But don't think the hunger trap is the only enemy. No, there are others, more silent, more cunning, and more inevitable. In the next chapter, we'll face one of them, a force so relentless that it shaped the very destiny of humanity. What is it? That I'll reveal next. If hunger was the first enemy, nature was the executioner waiting in silence. And the mistake modern minds make is thinking that the Stone Age was a kind of open-air supermarket where people simply walked into the wild and pulled life off the branches. The truth is far more ruthless because the environment wasn't neutral. It was hostile, it was cunning, and it killed not with a roar, but with a whisper, and you, stepping into it unprepared, would learn very quickly that the earth itself had teeth. Consider the weather. You are used to shelter, walls, warm clothing stitched perfectly, heaters that glow at the push of a button. Strip that away, and you face the raw climate. Nights that turn bone-cracking cold, days that boil the skin, rains that soak you to the marrow. In the Stone Age, exposure was death just as certain as starvation. Hypothermia could creep in before you even realized it, draining your heat until you lost your will to move. But here's the part you won't expect. Sometimes hypothermia killed not because of the cold, but because hunger and exhaustion made it impossible for your body to fight back. That hidden connection between weather and hunger is one of those cruel tricks of nature I'll explain more deeply later. But remember this. Every drop of rain, every gust of wind was not scenery. It was a weapon. And then there was disease. Modern humans live in sanitized bubbles where water is filtered, food is regulated, and medicine waits at every corner. The Stone Age had none of that, which meant that the smallest wound, a scratch from a thorn or a bite from an insect, could fester into an infection that spread through your body like fire. People today underestimate how fragile they are without antibiotics. You cut yourself, you think it's nothing, but back then, that little wound could turn black, fever could rise, and death could come in days. And here's a cruel irony. Often it wasn't predators or starvation that claimed lives in the Stone Age. It was infections, parasites, invisible enemies you couldn't see. There's one particular parasite, one that Stone Age people battled constantly, that could drain your strength day after day until you became too weak to hunt, too weak to move, and ultimately too weak to live. But I won't reveal its name just yet. Stay with me, because that detail will come later, and it will shock you how close it still lurks to our world. But perhaps the most merciless weapon of nature was unpredictability. A sudden storm could flood hunting grounds. A drought could wipe out entire regions of plants. Animals could migrate, leaving you stranded with nothing. The land shifted constantly, and Stone Age humans had to shift with it, adapting, learning, moving like shadows. And you, transported there without warning, would not have that knowledge. You'd stand still, hoping the land would provide, while the land itself turned against you. And here's a secret I'll keep from you for now. The environment didn't just kill the unprepared. It forged the future of human intelligence. It forced our ancestors to invent, to imagine, to fight against time itself. But that revelation, that turning point, is a story for another chapter. Now let's not forget predators. Lions, hyenas, wolves, bears, creatures you know from documentaries and zoo cages. But in the Stone Age, they were not behind glass. They were in the shadows with you. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Predators didn't need to kill you to win. They only needed to scare you away from your food, to circle your camp, to make you lose the little energy you had in defending yourself. That kind of psychological war was just as deadly as claws or teeth. And there's something else, something darker that people never talk about. Sometimes humans weren't just the hunters or the hunted. They were the scavengers. Often tribes would wait for predators to make the first kill, then risk everything to steal the scraps, gambling with death because starvation left no other choice. But that desperate strategy carried a terrible price, and I'll explain it in detail later. For now, remember this: predators were not simply beasts. They were competitors, rivals in the race for survival, and more often than not, they won. Water, too, was treacherous. You think you could just kneel by a stream, cup your hands, and drink deeply. But in the Stone Age, that sip could be the last choice you ever made. Contaminated water could poison you, parasites could crawl into your body, and rivers could sweep you away. Finding safe water was as critical as finding food, but it required a kind of knowledge, an inherited wisdom of where to drink and where to avoid. Without that, you'd be gambling every time you quenched your thirst. And here's a chilling fact: even when Stone Age people found water, they often carried diseases inside them from birth to death, chronic infections that became part of their daily existence. What were these diseases? I'll leave that unanswered for now, because when I reveal the truth later, you'll realize how fragile you really are. Now let's draw the picture more vividly. You've survived the hunger trap for a few days, your stomach gnawing at itself, and then the sky darkens. Rain lashes down, your fire dies, and cold wraps around you like chains. You shiver, you tremble, you try to huddle beneath branches that give no protection. Morning comes and you stagger to your feet, weakened, only to step on a sharp stone that cuts your foot. Hours later, fever begins. You try to drink water, but it makes your stomach cramp. You see shadows moving, glowing eyes in the distance, predators watching. Suddenly, the land itself feels alive, against you, punishing you for existing. And that is the truth of nature in the Stone Age. It didn't care, it didn't pity, it didn't forgive. It was a silent executioner, and it demanded tribute in blood and lives. But, and here's where the suspense thickens, this merciless executioner, this brutal environment, also shaped the greatest weapon humanity would ever wield. What was that weapon? How did our fragile ancestors fight back against the unstoppable? That, my friend, is the story of the next chapter. Stay tuned. If hunger was the trap and nature the executioner, then knowledge was the blade that separated survival from extinction. And here lies the cruelest truth of all. Even if you had the strength, even if you had the courage, Without knowledge, you were already dead, because survival in the Stone Age was not about muscle or bravery. It was about an invisible library of skills and secrets that modern humans no longer carry. And without that inherited memory, you would stumble through the wild like a blind traveler on a cliff's edge. People today think survival is instinctive, that you can simply figure it out when pressed. But the Stone Age was not a puzzle you solved in a day. It was a book written in blood across generations, every chapter forged by failure, every page inked with the deaths of those who tried and fell. And our ancestors didn't just know how to hunt. They knew where animals migrated at certain times of the year. They knew the signs written in the soil, the tracks carved into the earth, the sound of a twig snapping that told them predator or prey. And you, standing there with 21st century ears, would hear nothing but noise, blind to the code that whispered in every rustle, every footprint, every shadow, an ignorance that would be fatal, and I'll prove it in a moment. Think about tools. You live in a world of steel knives, metal pots, manufactured goods, but strip that away, and you face stone, wood, and bone. And even those were useless without the knowledge of how to shape them, because a sharp edge didn't appear by accident. It took skill, patience, and practice, a precise strike that fractured flint into a razor, a careful binding of sinew that transformed a stick into a spear, and you, empty-handed in that world, wouldn't know which stone fractured cleanly, wouldn't know how to bind wood with fiber, wouldn't know how to sharpen without wasting energy, and instead of blades, you'd hold broken shards that cut your hands, wasting more calories than you could afford. And here's a haunting secret. Some tribes guarded their tool-making knowledge as if it were gold, refusing to share it with outsiders, meaning survival wasn't just about skill, it was about power, control, and sometimes deception. Knowledge itself became a weapon. Fire was no different. You may think rubbing sticks together produces flames, but it produces nothing but smoke, frustration, and failure, unless you know the right woods, the dryness, the rhythm, the patience. And even when sparks came, they needed to be caught in tinder so delicate it could cradle a breath into flame. And tribes carried embers across miles wrapped in bark because starting over was death. Yet fire carried its own danger, because while it gave warmth and protection, it also glowed like a signal in the night, drawing predators closer, a beacon of survival that doubled as a lure for danger. And I'll return to that later, because it changes everything about how you think of safety. Then there was food. I've told you plants could kill, but here's the terrifying detail. Tribes carried in their heads a pharmacy of the wild, a living encyclopedia of which roots soothed pain, which berries poisoned the blood, which mushrooms twisted the mind. And this wasn't instinct, it was inheritance. Memory passed mouth to mouth, elder to child, woven into rituals so it would never vanish. And you standing in a forest would see only confusion, green upon green, and you would pluck the wrong root, cook the wrong leaf, swallow death disguised as dinner, or worse still, you might waste time preparing food that gave no nutrition at all, eating without feeding, sliding into hidden starvation. A paradox I'll expose more deeply later. Hunting strategies, too, were built on knowledge. Animals weren't simply chased, they were driven into traps, stalked with precision, ambushed at rivers, or herded toward cliffs, collective strategies that took entire groups to execute, meaning survival was communal, coordinated, and inherited, and you, alone and ignorant, would stand no chance. And don't believe that humans always hunted bravely. Sometimes they scavenged, waiting for predators to make a kill, then risking everything to steal scraps. And that desperation, too, was a kind of knowledge, a grim tactic passed down when options ran out. Shelter as well was knowledge. You think you could lean branches together, but without knowing how wind cuts valleys, how rivers flood plains, how predators mark caves, you would build wrong, and wrong shelters killed. Too damp, too cold, too exposed. And our ancestors knew the geometry of survival, how to weave grasses for insulation, how to angle hides to resist rain. And without that skill, your walls would collapse by morning, leaving you trembling and soaked, a sitting target for the cold. So draw this picture clearly. You, a modern human, step into the Stone Age with nothing but your cleverness. And cleverness is not enough. Your stomach gnaws, the air bites, shadows move, You try to craft tools and fail. You try to make fire and fail. You try to eat and poison yourself. You try to drink and grow sick. You try to build shelter and it collapses. And all the while, predators circle, storms approach, hunger eats at your strength. In that moment, you realize the truth that most people never accept. It wasn't brute strength that kept our ancestors alive. It wasn't chance. It wasn't even instinct. It was knowledge. Knowledge bought in blood, sharpened like stone, guarded like treasure, and without it, you don't last a week. But knowledge itself had a cost, and the price was often starvation, death, or betrayal, because survival lessons were written in the graves of the unlucky, and those lessons carried humanity forward at an unspeakable cost. And here's where the story turns darker still, because even when you had knowledge, even when you had food, even when you thought you were safe, survival carried its own hidden paradoxes, and sometimes the very act of eating could push you closer to the grave. What was this paradox? How could food itself betray you? That, my friend, is the story of the next chapter. Stay tuned. You might think that if you overcame hunger, if you somehow managed to catch an animal, gather roots, or stumble upon berries, the nightmare would end. But the Stone Age had another cruel trick to play, a paradox so vicious that it still shocks anthropologists today. The very food that kept you alive could just as easily kill you, because survival wasn't only about finding something to eat. It was about eating the right thing, in the right amount, in the right way. And without that knowledge, you would step straight into death's arms with every bite. Take meat, for example. You picture a successful hunt, a deer brought down, muscle carved away, roasted on fire, and you think that's salvation. But here's the hidden truth. Lean. Meat, pure muscle without fat, could actually kill you. A phenomenon modern science calls rabbit starvation, where your body consumes protein beyond what it can process, leaving you sick, weak, and dying even as you eat. And Stone Age tribes knew this instinctively, turning instead to fat, marrow, and organ meat, the parts you might discard today, but which carried the calories, vitamins, and energy that kept them alive. Imagine the horror of finally catching food after days of starvation, devouring it, and feeling your body collapse anyway. Your stomach full, but your strength fading. This is the paradox of food, a cruel reminder that in the Stone Age, even victory was laced with danger. And plants? Plants were worse. As I hinted earlier, the forest was not a supermarket, but a minefield. Every root, berry, and leaf carrying the possibility of poison. And some poisons didn't kill quickly. They killed slowly, painfully, blinding you, twisting your organs, draining your breath until death arrived like a final mercy. And only the inherited memory of the tribe told which was safe, which was medicine, and which was a death sentence. But there's a twist. Sometimes even the plants that were safe were not safe enough because they contained toxins in low doses that accumulated over time, turning daily meals into slow killers. And this is something modern humans rarely consider, that survival often meant gambling with risk, eating just enough of something dangerous to stay alive, hoping it wouldn't catch up with you before the next season brought safer food. And water carried its own paradox. You may remember how I told you rivers could poison, but here's the deeper truth. Stone Age humans sometimes drank deliberately from unsafe sources, balancing sickness against thirst, knowing full well the parasites might come, but also knowing death by dehydration was quicker. And this terrible compromise, drink and suffer later or refuse and die now, was an everyday calculation. Even fish, which seemed like the ultimate lifeline, carried hidden traps. Eat them raw and you risked parasites. Cook them poorly and you risked disease. Rely on them too much and you risked malnutrition, because not every fish carried the fats and nutrients needed for long-term survival. And here's a haunting fact I'll only hint at. There were entire regions where tribes vanished not because they starved outright, but because their food sources lacked one critical nutrient, and their bodies withered in ways we barely understand today. I'll disclose the shocking detail of that nutrient later because it reveals just how thin the line of survival truly was. But food paradoxes weren't only biological, they were social. Imagine you had food, but predators smelled it, or rival tribes saw it. Suddenly the very thing you thought would save you marked you as prey. And carrying meat could mean carrying your own death sentence. Sometimes food was hidden, buried underground, or carried secretly, not because there was too little, but because showing it meant losing it to those stronger, faster, or more desperate. And here's a secret that will disturb you. Sometimes, when food ran out, humans turned on each other because starvation bends morality, reshapes it, erases it. And there are archaeological sites with bones scarred by knives, not for hunting, but for cannibalism, proof that the ultimate paradox of food was that in its absence, humans themselves became the last resource. I won't reveal all the details yet because they are darker than you expect, but keep it in your mind as the story unfolds. So picture it clearly. You think you've escaped hunger, you've caught a rabbit, plucked roots, boiled water, eaten until your stomach stretches, but hours later you feel weaker, not stronger, your body betraying you, your mind fogging, your skin burning with fever, because in the Stone Age, food was not salvation. It was a gamble, a constant test of knowledge, timing, and restraint, and every bite carried both life and death in its flavor. And this, more than predators or storms, reveals why you would starve in the Stone Age, even when you thought you were eating, because without knowing the paradox of food, without knowing what to eat, when to eat, and how much, you'd fall victim to the cruelest irony of all, death by survival. But this paradox leads to a deeper revelation, because if hunger, nature, knowledge, and food itself could all betray you, then how did humanity rise above these endless traps? What force allowed fragile humans to not only endure, but dominate? That answer lies in something greater than muscle, greater than fire, greater than tools. It lies in unity, in cooperation, in the collective power of tribes. And that, my friend, is the story of the next chapter. Stay tuned.